as I'm seemingly always telling you guys, over at esports pools, you can play fantasy esports, where what you do is you put together a team based on the players who are playing in a specific tournament and based on what they're valued at in terms of the overall salary cap, and you have a total amount to make your team from. So you can choose, you can have like a superstar player, 2 superstar players, but then you've got to have some worse players to even it out. Now what's great about this is it's fun. Like, you get to pick the players you think are going to do well. Who do you think's on a hot streak? Who do you think's undervalued within the system? Like, sometimes there'll be a very good player, but for whatever basis of stats they're using, whose value is really cheap, and you think that guy's really going to frag well, especially against these opposition. And what's actually kind of a pretty cool kicker, I think, a little bonus as well, is that when you put together this team and pick the players you think are good, no matter what team you put together and you're essentially saying are going to be the best team, people from South America don't come and suddenly tell you that they're going to kill you, or that you should be fired, or that even the owners of the internet should ban you from publishing, whatever that indeed means. So SK Gaming is the best team in Counter-Strike right now. If you had to put your money down on a team to win a tournament tomorrow, a massive 500k, $100 million tournament, you'd pick SK Gaming. They have the best player in Cold Zero. They're the most clutch team. They've got a fantastic map pool. They've got very good recent form. They won 3 of their 4 events with boltz in the lineup. But their problem is they can't use boltz, their newest recruit, for the E-League Boston Major early next year. And so they are forced to use Phelps, the player that boltz replaced. Now, first of all, in terms of these rules, yeah, I don't like them. Like, I don't like this particular application of the roster lock. I don't think it should have been done this way. Like, personally, I think they should have the same rules and the same overall criteria, but I think that the major cycle should be a lot shorter so that it's less of an issue, so that you know going in that if you make this player change 3 or 4 weeks out, then that's going to cost you at the major, and you're making that choice actively. Or you ride it out with the old lineup and you say, well, it's only 3 or 4 more weeks. Come on, mate. Stop fucking everyone's girlfriends, if indeed that ever had happened in any scenario. Heh, banter. Now, what I think they should do is have something along the lines of shorten the major cycle. So make it so that, first of all, now the major qualifier just is the major. It's the first phase of the major. So now we can get rid of the major qualifier aspect. How about just put the minors 2 weeks before the major, and then put the roster lock a week before the minors? So put the roster lock 3 weeks before the major, and then have the minors 2 weeks before the major, and then the major happens. And then, first of all, there's only like, look at that, that's like a 4-week span. You have to use one player in, basically. So either you make your change 3 weeks before and you know what you need to do, or you just wait until after the major, then right after the major you make your player move. So I think that would be the easiest way to solve it personally. With that said, I think people are going about it the wrong way and complaining. Like, I understand why they're complaining, absolutely. I think it's pretty cool that not only are the SK players complaining, but actually even people like Guardian on FaZe, who now has a much better chance of winning the major. Guy has never won a major, by the way. Is literally saying, like, if we were to win the major, it wouldn't mean as much without SK having boltz. Yeah, that's actually very cool. It shows a lot of sportsmanship and shows actually this guy wants to be the best, not just be the champion, which is actually a key distinction to make with players. With that said, though, they've put too much of their energy and their force behind making the complaint now. Now, the problem is, even if E-League agreed to change the rules now, I would be dead against that. They absolutely should not change the rules now. The rules are already in place and have been enforced right up until now. So if they change the rules at this point, it's unfair to other people. There's other teams who might want to change a player, who might have done it 2 weeks ago, or wouldn't have stuck with a certain player, or wouldn't have gone to the qualifier. There's all sorts of problems that it would create. So what you need to do is keep the rules the same for this major cycle. Next major cycle, we need to get it changed. And I agree with that. And that's something where it would be appropriate to make a video at that point in time to pressure Valve and put forth these ideas to the community and see if people agree. So I hope that people will put in the same effort complaining after the major. That would be the ultimate time to complain. And by the way, that's when someone like Guardian's tweet will help even more. Because if SK don't win the major and then they complain, yeah, there's going to be some people who are like, it's sour grapes, you're just complaining because you didn't win the major. But I tell you what, imagine a world in which actually FaZe does win the major because SK doesn't have boltz. And let's imagine that FaZe won the major, and then 2 days later, a week later, after he's finished celebrating, Guardian does a tweet and he just says, it was amazing to win the major, but actually it didn't mean as much as it would have done if SK had boltz there, because I wanted to beat them. I need to beat them in the right. Yeah, that would be amazing, and that would be a really cool way to draw attention to this issue. Can't be solved right now. Anyway, that's the rule aspect out of the way. Now let's get to the fact of SK Gaming using Phelps, because I feel like, while I understand people want to paint the case as extreme as possible to try and pressure Valve to let the best team in the world, SK Gaming, have boltz, the player that they need to be the best team in the world, I think people are being way too pessimistic, acting as if now their chances to win are just done. And suddenly it's a wasted major or a wasted opportunity because they don't have boltz and they have to use Phelps. This is nothing like any of the other roster problems I can think of that people had at majors. So back at MLG Columbus, the first tournament that the Luminosity guys who are now SK won, NIP, Pitt had a problem with his visa, so he didn't arrive on time, and they had to use Threat, their coach, for the entire tournament. And while, yes, Threat's good as an in-game leader type figure, he is fucking terrible individually in CS. They still managed to make top 8. Now, yeah, from what I remember, I think that was the group that had the Mouse Sports and Flipside in. Part of it was how god-awful Mouse Sports was on LAN, aside from Nico, basically. And actually, at the majors, Nico tended to have a little bit of a dip, I have to say. Then you go to the next major, ESL 1 Cologne 2016. This was the one where Astralis were without Kirby, who they'd recruited a month or two earlier, I think. Because obviously the major cycle was spread out then, and he'd won the minor with Dignitas, from what I remember. So they couldn't use Kirby. And that made, by the way, they were already unlikely to win anyway. They were in a slump as it was, and that's actually why they'd made the move for Kirby as it is, after they'd finished like last place in 2 international tournaments. So they were unlikely to win even with Kirby, but he was certainly one of their better players. Then you have to consider that they had to use Glaive as a stand-in who'd never played with the team before, and he wasn't even playing as an in-game leader. He was just a fragger in this thing. And what people forget is, then, on top of that, they had illness where Dupree was ill and had to literally not play in the tournament, so they had to use their coach Zonic, who has been retired for like half a decade or something, as one of their actual starting roster players for the major. And what people always forget about Astralis at that tournament is they almost made the semi-finals of that tournament, even with all those different problems and changes. They had a series against Virtus.pro in the quarterfinals, which is always the forgotten series in my opinion, because both maps went to overtime, and Device was carrying the fuck out of Astralis, and they narrowly didn't make some epic run to the semis. And obviously, remember what happened in the semis? That was where Virtus.pro really tested SK and tested SK to the limit before SK went on and won the tournament. So would have changed the whole complexion of the tournament if that game had gone differently. Then you've got to throw in the fact that for the major after that, the E-League major at the beginning of this year, SK was using Fox as a stand-in. Now, listen, losing FNX was actually pretty comparable, I think, to what happened in this lineup. Because, yeah, he was a good player. They had a good lineup before. They had to bring in someone who, in this case, also, just like they're having to bring in, it's actually, I think that was a worse scenario, because in that case, they actually didn't use FNX himself. They brought in Fox, and he was a worse player than FNX, and worse player than Phelps, who later replaced him, and they had to change up so much around him. But guess what? They were still pretty good, and they still managed to make it to top 4, and in that scenario, they didn't really have the option to bring back FNX, because that's the whole reason they had to make the move in the first place, because the lineup had just completely disintegrated, and in a way worse than what happened with Phelps, because even beyond the personal issues they had with FNX and motivation and all this sort of shit, there's the fact that they had just proven at that point that they could not win anymore. They had consistently shown that that lineup was not going to win anymore. That yes, they made semis and finals all day long. Yeah, I agree. But they were losing to everyone in those semis and finals. Like, it was one thing when they were first just losing to Virtus.pro or, top level to Astralis when they first got Glaive. That's one thing, because those teams clearly showed they were amazing. But when they lost EPL to Cloud9 and they lost Oakland to NIP, these were the ones that were the kicker. These showed that, like, actually, these guys aren't going to win anymore. There's something wrong with the lineup. Even though it's still very consistent, it's not a championship lineup anymore in the same sense as it was before. Now you look at the other teams, for example, that are going to be affected at this major who aren't SK. So Team Liquid doesn't have Steel. Now, admittedly, Steel's just been added to the lineup. Okay, Stanislaw wasn't that good a player in the lineup. So, okay, not that big a deal, right? But they can't use him anyway. So they're having to use Zeus, their coach, who hasn't been a very good in-game leader, very good player when he's played in the game. He's been a very good coach, though. So yes, Team Liquid's chances are massively crippled. Then you look at Astralis. Due to illness, they can't use Device, who is their best and most pivotal player in the lineup, and they have to use Zonic, who's their coach, again in the lineup. So that almost utterly kills Astralis' chances of winning this major. I mean, it's almost certainly not going to happen unless they have some utterly miraculous, like greatest upset of all time type run, Cinderella-esque run through the tournament. Because beyond losing Device, your best player, it's the fact you have to use Zonic. That just destroys your chances. It doesn't matter what Dupree and Zipnix and all the rest of them do. So now let's look at the situation that SK is in with Phelps. Because, like I say in the title of the video, SK Gaming, SK can win the major with Phelps. As in, it's pretty reasonable. In fact, it's fairly likely they can win the major with Phelps. That was a lineup that existed before. They're not just using a stand-in. It's a team that won 5 titles, 3 of which were big-time titles. IEM Sydney, ECS Season 3, ESL 1 Cologne. These were big tournaments that had the other best teams in the world at them, and they won them, and they won them in impressive fashion. Sometimes dominant, sometimes clutch, sometimes having to win on different maps. It was just amazing shit. Then you consider that at this tournament, okay, their main rival at this major is going to be FaZe, right? As it has been for the last few months. Well, they've already beaten FaZe a bunch with their new lineup, and they already had beaten FaZe pretty much every time with the old lineup as well, in like 3 best of X series or something. Then you got to consider not only had they beat FaZe a bunch with this lineup, but even when they played an Astralis who had all their pieces, it was back and forth with them. They were beating Astralis was beating them. Right, well, consider this. FaZe still has the psychological issues, which, if anything, are only mounting. So you still have something of an edge if you play them. Astralis essentially aren't even at the tournament because they don't have device, and he was so key, not only to Astralis generally, but he was the main player who was allowing Astralis to get wins over SK since back when they had FNX, then when they had Phelps, and now coming into the area. They haven't yet beaten them when they have boltz, but they came very close at Blast Pro Series. Obviously, I mean, and that one, well, actually, that doesn't make sense, does it, I guess, because Device wasn't in that tournament. So, well, then they didn't beat them, did they? So maybe that helps in a sense, right? Now, one of the reasons why I think it's kind of bullshit that people are downplaying SK's chances or acting like it's already ruined is because Phelps is a very strong player. This is a guy where actually you don't see all of his potential because he's been used as like a 3rd star or a more restrained player within the system. Here's a guy who can bring massive fragging. Remember his first 3 or 4 tournaments with SK? He was fragging on the same level as Fur. They had 3 monsters in that team. They had coldzera, Fur, and Phelps, who would fuck your shit up when they went against you. That was one of the nastiest teams in terms of fragging, because they weren't just FaZe, who were more freeform. They were mad fraggers, but within a team system and with supportive elements in the team. And obviously the fact that coldzera plays something of a supportive element within the team allowed some of that mad fragging and aggression from those players. So he absolutely is a very dangerous player to bring into this lineup. It can do a lot for them. I actually think they would and probably should have won PGL Krakow, which was the last major, with Phelps in their lineup. The only reason they didn't, the one reason they didn't, as far as I'm concerned, is because Device had an epic all-time great major playoff series where he just went ham over the 2 maps, especially the map on Overpass, which was absolutely unbelievable. And the way he read and presumably had scouted Fallen was ridiculous and absolutely made the game a mismatch. Other than that, I think if they win that series, which SK was favoured to on the map pool and the matchup and form, they go to the semis. I'm saying that they smash Gambit. I reckon they just straight up 2-0 them. And then when they play Immortals in the final, child please, they would have bodied those fuckers. So they would have won the major. They probably should have won the major. But you know what? Sometimes amazing series happen. Sometimes a player has a godlike day where everything works for him. And then you have to add in, Astralis had like, they were something of a black box because no one could scout them before because they didn't play ESL 1 Cologne. Meanwhile, they were scouting everyone else, such as SK, such as FaZe. So I think a lot of factors just went against them on the day and overall there. So I don't like the fact that people have rewritten history where, because SK with boltz now is so amazing and has started so hot that they might yet go on to be the best team ever, who knows, people have like rewritten history now to make out as though like SK weren't good with Phelps in the team. Like what? Even worse, they imply, because it went to shit at the end after the player break, like he never fit the team. What the fuck is that? They were an amazing clutch team who was winning tournaments left, right, and centre when they got going. And he had very good fragging, and their overall fragging in the team was godlike for a team with such great structure and such great team play. I also think, despite the problems he had towards the end in SK, and by the way, some of them, they really just threw him under the bus there, like some of that Inferno shit. I also think that he will have a different mentality when he comes into this tournament because he knows it's his last tournament for SK, and more importantly, it's his last current tournament on the horizon where he has a chance to win a major. He already blew the one when he was against Astralis in the PGL Krakow major. This is his chance to literally win a major. They're not going to keep him even if they win the major. So I think he's going to be fully locked in. He's going to have his practice. He's going to play the role that he needs to. Hopefully he plays to a good level and knows that he has a shot at a major. I actually think Phelps has now gone back to being one of the most underrated players in the world because people don't understand. What you saw from him in SK was very good, but it wasn't his potential. Like, I think actually this guy, whether it's next year or 2 years from now, he's going to be a coldzera or a Fur himself. And that's the way it's going to be from here on out. And by the way, if he ain't an SK, then SK is going to have a problem because he's going to be a problem for them. That's how good he is. And he's coming from that region. And he's going to be playing against them in NA. And he's going to be playing against them in big tournaments. I just hope he gets onto a good team, Brazilian or otherwise, because I think the guy's a fantastic talent. Now, another reason why they can win with Phelps is because SK can adapt. Remember how well they played with Fox, who was a much, much worse player than Phelps. And they had to switch up a lot to make that lineup work with Fox, but they made it work. They almost made the final. They were in that epic series where it was so close against Virtus.pro at the E-League Major back in January. Players like Fur and Fallen have shown us again and again, yeah, they can be great players. They can be star players. They can also sacrifice if they need to. And they can make a team work and they can cover someone's weaknesses to allow their strengths to shine. So if they could do that with Fox and make the team look very good, they can absolutely do it with Phelps, make him look very good, sacrifice a little bit themselves and still be a very good team. Then you've got to consider, just like when Astralis played at Blast with Dennis instead of Device, they're going to get a slight edge at this major in a sense, because they can't be scouted very well. Because you can go back to the old demos from months and months ago when they had Phelps, but odds are they aren't going to play that way. They're going to change things up, they're going to practice differently with Phelps, but you're not going to know how they're practicing unless you've practiced against them. Meanwhile, they can scout every other team. They can watch all FaZe's games, they can watch all of G2's games. Now, it also, by the way, helps that they didn't qualify for ECS, because as a result, no one can scout them from ECS if they had to use Phelps there. Then let's also consider, forget about Phelps for a second, they have coldzera. They have the best player in the world and arguably the best player at majors ever. Anytime you have coldzera, you have a chance to win any map, any series, and if he plays really well and then some other pieces come online, you can win any tournament as well. Finally, we know the lineup they had with Phelps, I actually think the lineup with boltz hasn't proven this yet. I think the lineup with Phelps was the most clutch lineup that they've maybe ever had. They were unbelievable there. The comebacks they could do, the steel nerve that they had when they were in all those tough situations. You just knew they were going to win every overtime, it felt like. They were unbelievable. Like the game, those two series they had back-to-back against Astralis and against FaZe at ECS were just unreal. Against Astralis was in position to win the whole series. Then in the final, they got rocked on the first map and then narrowly edged out the other maps against FaZe. That's a tournament where any other team just goes out in the semis or just loses in the final. And they won that motherfucker. So this team with Phelps was very good, and these are very good players, and when they're in the moment, they're not going to be thinking about, oh, we could have boltz, but the boltz sounds better. They're just going to play the fucking game and do the best they can, and that could be a lot, because here's the thing, for my money, they are the second most likely team to win the title, even with Phelps standing in. Now, obviously, FaZe is number one because now they've got something of a limitation on them, SK. They don't have the same lineup. They have to rejig some things. FaZe is still very strong. And more importantly, it doesn't even matter if the matchup still applies. Even if head-to-head SK can beat FaZe, can SK get to the point where they play FaZe? Can SK get to the final? We don't know yet. Generally, you'd have to favour FaZe because FaZe has been so good against the rest of the field. That's why they're odds on to win the major now. But beyond that, SK's right behind them. Look at the other teams, right? So Astralis is completely crippled, got no device, which makes them way less of a threat to SK as well. Team Liquid is also crippled because they don't have steel, and they're in a situation where they're using their coach, so their coach can't even stand behind them, and this is going to be a very weird scenario. And remember, Team Liquid was the team that by beating SK a bunch of times, helped them put themselves in that slump where they then had to kick Phelps. That's not a problem anymore. North is a team that's matched up decently with them. You might remember they beat SK in the group stage at DreamHack Malmo when they still had Phelps. North slumping right now. They're not looking very good. Their pick ban aspects really crippling them. Finally, G2, the team that classically always beat SK, is still all over the place. Worse, if anything, now than even back when they were at the last major where they didn't even make top 8. So yeah, G2 has always had a very good head-to-head. They might not even get anywhere close to playing against SK. So SK actually has a very good chance still to win this major. Yes, it sucks that they don't have boltz. I'd love to see them play this major with boltz. But it's not half as bad as people are making out. And it would not surprise me at all if after this major, we're saying, oh my God, SK Gaming, first team to ever win a major with a stand-in.
What in God's name is that from Thorin?